In the Voice of Russia World Service, welcome to another edition of the Christian Message from Moscow.
Once a man approached the Saviour and asked his help in splitting an inheritance with his brother. Christ replied, "Take heed, and be aware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth." A man dreaming of becoming wealthy ceases to perceive the true wealth, in other words, life itself, granted him by the Lord. This is why often a man perceives himself as poor, notwithstanding how much money he might have. In today's program we shall be dwelling on wealth and poverty. We shall begin with a brief acquaintance with one underprivileged Russian family.
Denis and Anna Volkov got married exactly 10 years ago. They now live in Moscow region. The Volkovs have 4 children, with another one on the way. The father returns home from work late, so all the household chores fall to the mother. In their family budget, all the money is spent on food. There is simply none left for anything else. Nonetheless, the Volkovs do not consider themselves poor. Let's ask them why.
Когда у нас было 2 детей, мы даже себе представить не могли, что был еще 3. Такие были тяжелые условия жилищные.
Anna Volkov says that when she and her husband had 2 children, they lived in terrible conditions, constantly moving from one place to another. However, things miraculously worked themselves out. Her husband found employment that offered better pay, and this eased their lot significantly. Besides, many people offered to share with the Volkovs whatever they had. Some offered children's clothing, some other necessary items, said Anna. The first to return from school is the Volkovs' eldest son, 9-year-old Vasily. He is in the 3rd grade of secondary school. Hardly has he finished doing his homework when his 2 younger brothers wake up, 3-year-old Stepan and 1-year-old Andrei. Then 6-year-old Maria comes home from her gym class. After saying prayers together, they all sit down at the table. The dinner is a modest fare, but nutritious. For dessert, their favorite treat, apple pie baked by Anna. The father of the family comes home later than everyone else. Denis Volkov often takes work back home with him and spends the entire evening at the computer. His salary is meager, so he is obliged to do outside work. But he never loses heart.
Зарплату приношу, я ее кладу в определенное место, и, слава Богу,
Denis says that as a rule his salary covers the basic necessities, thank God. However, for the present they can afford nothing but clothes. Luckily, kind people help them out.
Happiness is not in wealth, goes an old Russian saying, and the Volkov family agrees with this. We have great hope and faith in God that He will arrange everything, and so He does. In present-day Russia, the rift between the wealthy and the very poor people is quite significant. This cannot but concern the leadership of the country, which promises to do everything in its power to narrow this gap as soon as possible. As for Orthodox believers, are they chiefly wealthy or do they find themselves among the underprivileged? Responding to this question in a TV program, Orthodox Encyclopedia, which comes out on Channel 3 of Moscow television, sociologist Mikhail Tarusin said the following.
Сегодня ведь идет вообще ренессанс православный в стране, и количество верующих очень сильно увеличили за последние 10 лет.
We are witnessing an Orthodox renaissance today in our country, and the number of believers has grown significantly over the past 10 years, says the sociologist. Among the believers we find people with low incomes, quite well-to-do folk, as well as wealthy people. As compared with the Soviet epoch, the number of well-off believers has grown. This is understandable, since in Soviet times the believers were chiefly elderly folk. Generally, in Russia, wealth was never considered the supreme value in life, says sociologist Mikhail Tarusin.
Indeed, in Russia, wealth was never prized above all else, all the more so among the Orthodox believers. However, in recent time, the local mass media have unleashed an aggressive campaign proclaiming wealth as the dominant criteria of self-realization, a concept that is by nature alien to our compatriots. In line with this concept, the better your house, car, or resort you go to, the more worthy it makes you as a human being. However, sociologist Mikhail Tarusin doesn't perceive any great danger in this. He thinks the attitude towards wealth that was formed in the centuries of our existence cannot be undermined.
История церкви знает немало людей, для которых богатство не стало препятствием на пути к спасению. Это равноапостольные цари, царицы, благоверные князья и святые.
In the history of the Russian Orthodox Church, says Moscow clergyman Alexei Uminsky, we know of many people for whom wealth was no deterrent in their striving for salvation. These are the equal to the apostles Tsars and Tsarinas, the pious princes. And so many wealthy people invested their fortunes in popular education and medicine, culture and charity. Take, for example, the merchants Tretiakov and Rябushinsky, or the merchant Vasily Muravyov, one of the richest men in St. Petersburg of the early 20th century.
This latter deserves special mention. Vasily Muravyov arrived in St. Petersburg in 1876. He was 10 years old then. He was taken on as an errand boy by one of the largest trading houses. A while later, already a teenager, Vasily came to the famous throughout Russia Petersburg monastery dedicated to Holy Prince Alexander Nevsky and requested to be admitted there as a monk. However, the reply was, first make a family of your own, raise children, and only then, with the consent of your wife, take on monkhood. His road to monkhood was drawn out to embrace 40 years. In that time, Vasily Muravyov achieved such success in the merchant trade that he became one of the leading fur traders in Petersburg. However, wealth did no harm to his soul. Here is an example. Returning to Petersburg after one trip to Europe, Vasily saw a peasant in the street exclaiming, "Not as you want, but as the Lord sees fit." It transpired he'd been robbed. his last money taken from him, while at home his family was perishing of typhoid. Vasily Muravyov bought the peasant some horses and a cow, gave him money, while he set off home repeating to himself the phrase pronounced by the peasant that had deeply impressed him: "Not as you want, but as the Lord sees fit." On the eve of the Socialist Revolution of 1917 in Russia, Vasily Muravyov distributed most of his fortune among the poor, made huge donations to monasteries, left his associates and staff a share, while he himself went off to join the monastery. Finally, the dream of his youth was realized. He was accepted into the brotherhood of the Petersburg Alexander Nevsky Monastery and given the name of Seraphim. At the end of the 1920s, he served in the village of Vyritsa in the environs of St. Petersburg. There he spent the last 20 years of his life. As an elder, Seraphim in that time received tens of thousands of people who sought his advice and counsel on various spiritual matters and life problems. Archimandrite Nazarius of the Alexander Nevsky Monastery says,
До сих пор есть живы, которые были у него на исповеди. И они говорят о том, какая кротость и смирение было у этого старца, но в то же самое время какая была сила.
Archimandrite Nazarius says that people who used to go to Seraphim of Vyritsa for confession are still living. They say that the elder was remarkably meek and humble. However, this was also a man of wondrous spiritual strength. During World War II, the village of Vyritsa was occupied by German fascists. Still, the elder managed to force the fascists to show him respect. They never touched him. In the days of war, Elder Seraphim prayed for 1,000 days and nights in the manner of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, standing on his knees on a big rock. He addressed the Holy Mother of God with the plea to grant our people victory. After the great victory, the elder took to his bed, never to rise up again until his death in April 1949. In the year 2000, he was consecrated as a Russian saint, said Archimandrite Nazarius.
Presently, in the village of Vyritsa, near the church to the Kazan icon of the Mother of God, where Elder Seraphim used to serve, there stands a chapel. There's a steady flow of people coming here to pray to the saint who succeeded in putting his wealth to good Orthodox Christian use and finding his place in the heavenly kingdom. And there we end another edition of the Christian Message from Moscow, dedicated this time to the Orthodox attitude to wealth and poverty. It made use of material from the program Orthodox Encyclopedia, coming out on Channel 3 of Moscow Television. And today's program was directed by Vladimir Dyomin, editor of text and music Tatiana Shvitsova, sound engineer Nadezhda Smirnova, and your hosts
Svetlana Yakimenko
and Pavel Novichkov. We say goodbye for now and leave you with Russian Orthodox music, performed by the non-vocal quartet Pritsha, or Parable, of the Raif Convent of the Holy Mother of God, a convent in the Volga River area, the Republic of Tatarstan.